All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Gridiron and Growth Podcast, Inside the Minds of Business Champions. Today, we have a special guest, Mr. Peter Lynch.
Man, now that is an intro. Wow.
Yeah, man. You always wanted horns, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, let me just introduce Ryan to Peter in terms of how I met Peter. Peter and I are part of the same Christians men's group. We met at a faith-based organization that supports men in the Denver area in terms of their leadership, in terms of their faith, and how to show up. We need that community, that support. And when I met Peter, this was like my new locker room. This is the new locker room where we meet once a month and we have that fellowship and we can talk. And Peter's just an incredible person, and he's a chief people officer at Cardinal Group, but then it's also an incredible speaker. So that is how I met Mr. Peter Lynch.
Well, I'm glad you two met so Peter could be here today.
Thank you so much.
So what is a chief people officer anyways?
I know, it sounds fun. There's a lot of hard work behind it too. No, really, I'm tasked with the culture of Cardinal Group, of not only kind of maintaining the right people in the right seat, finding the right talent, making sure they're paid appropriately, making sure our leaders are upskilled and our team members have the learning that they need, but really more importantly is to make sure that the heart and soul of who Cardinal is maintained. You know, one of the things in my experience at big companies, so I spent a lot of time at Fortune 500 companies, and one of the things I saw as companies grow is they tend to lose who they are. Mm-hmm. And so when I consulted with Cardinal and met Alex O'Brien, our CEO and co-founder, the first time.
Shout out to Alex.
That's right.
He's a great friend.
I knew that this was a place that was growing, but didn't want to lose that. They wanted to maintain a semblance of who they were. So that's, at a high level, that's what the chief people officer does. In the back end, it's all of the training, the comp and pay and benefits and hiring. But the heart and soul of who we are is to make sure that our identity stays.
Well, I have a couple of questions. Number one, how did you get to this point? How did you get to the chief people officer? I feel like that's a new role in businesses, and not a lot of businesses have adapted that yet, but how did you get to this role?
Yeah, so definitely for years it was known as the CHRO, right? The head of human resources. Mm-hmm. Which didn't necessarily have a lot of ethos and life to it. It was, policy, employee relations issues. I mean, not the fun stuff.
Right.
And what companies started to realize is that people and employees had choices, and they could choose to go somewhere else, and that culture mattered, right? People spent so much time at work, and this work-life balance idea was kind of gone. The lines between our work life and our at-home life are really blurred. And so they recognize that we have to make a place that people want to be, not only because it's good for us to keep people, but Deloitte found that those companies in the top quartile for engagement have 21% more profit than companies that don't.
So can you repeat that for people?
Yes.
Repeat that for the listeners
tell the people
right there.
Again.
Yes. Those that are in the top quartile for engagement have 21% more profit. So this isn't just the right thing to do. It's a good thing to do. And why wouldn't you want to do that? So companies started to say, let's look beyond the HR function and say, let's create this people function that now worries about how are we training our team members? How are we recognizing them and valuing them and building culture? And so how'd I get here? It's a great question. I started long ago in a single wide mobile home. My story starts there, a single mom that didn't graduate high school, tons of family chaos, just not really seeing any opportunity. And, just having something inside of me that thought, man, there's something more for me. And so, I was I was number 72 for first and second cousins. We were a very fertile family.
Wow. Very fertile family. I like that.
And I was the second to go to college and the first to graduate. And I had to do this on my own. I really learned from my mom the power of hard work. She milked cows for a living. She did all the hard work that I don't know that I ever could have done. And I thought, I want to make a difference. So I went to college and I was pursuing the path of becoming a pastor. I spent some time in a church. I took about 100 different mission trips, both to inner cities in the U.S. and overseas, built orphanages, did all this stuff. While I was doing that, I helped a friend open a restaurant in Seattle. And we ended up growing the restaurant to about 20 locations. Ooh, and he's actually now the head of operations at P.F. Chang's, just an amazing restaurant guy.
Nice.
And while I was doing that, I just fell in love with business. And it was really interesting because I had a conversation with a guy who was a pastor of mine. And when I told him that I was basically going to go into business, he looked at me and he said, I'm really sad that you're leaving your calling. And I said, I'm stepping into it. I said, there's something bigger out there. Like, there's just so many people that I believe, need somebody that is their advocate. And that's where I started the path. So then I started at Gateway Computers, if you remember the old cow-spotted boxes. Yeah. And I started training in the call center and the country store, the retail store. And again, just fell in love with the opportunity to impact human beings. And so I always say, I'm a chief people officer, right? I felt like HR forever forgot the H. They forgot the human component. And so we said, let's focus on the people. And then from there, just, went to Dish Network and went to LexisNexis and Western Union and Empower. And so all these big companies, and really just started to say, let's give a damn about humans and let's do some things that nobody else in the space is doing.
What are some of the key factors for engagement at a workplace that makes employees want to be there?
Yeah, everyone thinks it's rocket science, and it's not, right? Number one is they want to feel heard. So Glint did a study, and they found 53% of the workforce today says they feel invisible. Now, think about that word for a second. It's not that they feel marginalized or left behind. They feel invisible. I mean, it's a powerful word. So there's all these studies that say leaders that have conversations with their teams every week outperform every other team.
So just talking to
That's
them.
right. Just talk to them. Like, that's it, man. Just have a conversation, right? I always say, like, baby steps are the huge steps. So take a small step. Just talk to your team, number one. Number two is people want to be recognized. Everybody wants to feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves. So you have to find moments to recognize people. Number three is growth. People want to grow. 68% of millennials today would leave their current job for another that pays exactly the same if they knew they would just get more development. So they want to grow. And so you got to invest in them. I mean, it's little teeny things that grow into big things. Now, when we talk about Cardinal, we're doing really big things now related to this, but it started with little steps and a commitment to the people.
That's incredible. I mean, it is the simple things in life or simple things in an organization, simple things in life that really create the most dramatic change. When you joined Cardinal, or when you've joined any of these organizations, how do you start that? How do you start that process? If you're giving somebody advice on that, like, how do you start the process in terms of, okay, let's assess the culture, and then let's go from here? How do you assess those steps?
I mean, Benny, it's such an important question. And to me, it probably is the most important question. And that's why when I went to Cardinal, the very first thing we did is I went to Alex and I said, we need a tool that allows us to listen to our team members. Because I feel like I'm a smart guy. My wife would disagree, probably.
That's why you're happily married, though,
That's
right? Yeah, you let it go.
But I can assume what people want, but why not let them tell me? And so we invested in this listening tool, and twice a year, we listen to them. And when they tell us something, we do something about it. So I think the first thing you have to do is listen. And if you don't have a tool, set up roundtables. Just spend time talking to people and say, what do you wish the workplace looked like that it doesn't? What do you wish your leader did? What do you wish I did? What could we do tomorrow that would make the next day better? And it starts with little simple things like that. But I really think it's a foundation of listening.
What do you say to the leaders, though, who say, look, I don't want people to get the idea that they can just complain all day? Because that's what I could see a leader saying, look, I'd rather have none of this than to hear all of this.
This is a big part of, investing in leaders to get them to understand the mindset that they have to come with. And I always say, if I want my team to be something, I have to be it first. So I call it feet over words. We call it feet over words at work. It's like, I'm not going to talk about what I want from you. I'm going to show you. And so I'm going to be the person who doesn't complain, but when something's wrong, comes with a solution and does it. So I think you have to model. That's number one. But number two, you have to coach, right? You guys know how powerful coaching is, great coaching. You've had some of the best coaches in the world. But a lot of people who don't listen to them, I mean, it does nothing. You know, my best friend's a coach in the NBA, and he has this story that to me is one of my favorite from the NBA. He was at Indiana, one of Reggie Miller's last years. And at this point, he's 28 years old. And I grew up with him. Chad, I'm sorry, but he was a horrible basketball player.
That's what they say when you can't play coach.
Yeah. No, but he's out on the court, and Reggie Miller, after practice, is shooting threes. One of the greatest three-point shooters ever. And he said, Chad, come here. He said, I want you to watch my shot and tell me what I should change. This is the last couple of years of his career.
So Reggie's messing with him.
Yeah, yeah, probably messing with him. But he had this mentality of, I want to be coached. And so you have to get a team to realize that it's okay to tell me what's wrong, but then be willing to be coached. Because if you're not willing to be coached, guess what? People are going to stop investing in you. So you build this ethos of growth with openness of communication, and that cycle just continues. And it's so funny to see, like, we are so many steps ahead of where we were 4 years ago, and it doesn't feel like we've done anything significant, right? We've done the little things.
I think that's incredible. Well, I want to harp on the fact that to be coached, and incredible leaders, incredible players want to be coached. I will never forget, like, the times being in meetings with Peyton and, like, no, point it out.
Yeah.
Like, point it out. He would get upset if you just, like, patted him on the back.
Yeah.
So I definitely appreciate that from leaders. And then number two, how do you guys, and how do you specifically make sure that you guys are hiring A players? Because I see a lot of ups and downs with teams, or there's a lot of turnover in different industries. How do you guys go about hiring the right talent?
So a couple things. Number one is we have an amazing talent team that can go out and find the best talent and recognize really good talent. So it really does start there. You have to have a good team that can recognize what does it mean to have good talent. And part of that is an organization that has strong values. So we know what we're looking for. More than competence, we're looking for somebody who fits these values. Number one. Number two is there's this new metric in business that has become really powerful, and it's called the boomerang. It's people who think the grass is greener. They go somewhere else. And it might be greener. Maybe they learned something. Maybe there was an opportunity there that we didn't have. But they come back. And we are now boomeranging over 10% of our people, and we're one of the highest metrics in the industry. And it's beautiful because we have team members who are learning some things, coming back, and they're grateful for the opportunity to work where we work. And they're bringing new ideas. So that's another. And then the last is, I would say it goes back to how we eat food, which sounds weird.
Not to me, I'm a lineman.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So when anytime, like, if my wife's like, hey, we're going to go have dinner at this place, if I've never been there, where do I go look? I go look at Yelp, because I want to look at what the food looks like. I want to see what people are saying about it. And there is a Yelp for business today, and it's called Glassdoor. Yeah, Glassdoor is the Yelp of business. 90% of Gen Z go to Glassdoor before they apply for a job. They will not apply at jobs where people have said the food sucks.
Really?
And so we have focused on we have seen, because the interesting thing about Glassdoor is it's one of the only places where you can't buy your way to the top. This is not an award you can pay for and invest in. These are real voices of current and former team members saying real things about you. And so that score drives the truth of who you are as an organization. So what we have said is, let's use that as another listening tool, not to get angry when somebody says this was bad, but instead go, are they right? Because everybody, I have this definition of culture that's different from most people. Most people think it's words on a wall, it's aspirational, it's big things. That's not my definition of culture. Is the worst behavior you tolerate. So instead of the top, it's the bottom. What's your floor? It's great to have a big ceiling, but if you got a low floor, you're never going to get anywhere. So start there. So if we are a place that can't look at truth and go, is this true? And if it is, how do we stop it? Then we're never going to move that needle. But because we're top 1% of De&I for all real estate companies. Last year, Alex said this was the greatest moment in his career, his work life. We won number 54 in the top 100 for all companies in the U.S. over 1,000. First company in our space to ever win that award. And when you think about it, we're competing against companies that have big, corporate presences where they're paying people lots of money. We have tons of on-site team members, and they do hard work, really hard work. To win this award is so hard. And we were number 54. We were ahead of the likes of Sony and Apple and MasterCard and Deloitte and all these companies. And that was just so awesome to see that because it was authentic. So, those are just a couple of things that we look at.
Help me understand the resistance to DE&I in today's world.
I always say it's because people don't know what it is. So here's a real conversation I've had with an executive. I'm not going to use their name because I don't want them to feel bad. But they came to me, and I've launched 3 D&I programs now that have become world-class. And,
Thank you.
And,
Shout out to Peter.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with me. Honestly, it's just, I feel like I drive an organization to authentically see what it is. And I had an executive come to me at a big, big company, and he said, "You're forcing me to hire people based on how they look," in a meeting with a bunch of other people. And I paused and I said, "Hey, I'm really, really sorry." I said, "I have fundamentally failed you if I made you think something so stupid."
Oh.
I said, "That is the most idiotic thing I've ever heard." I said, "Here is what it really is. Your circle is based on who you know, how you grew up, and it's homogenous at some level." I said, "There are people outside of that circle who might be fundamentally amazing. All we want to do is put them in front of you and let you make the decision on who is the best person. So if you're making a decision on any other reason, then you're wrong." And every company I've been at, when we got the leaders to understand their unconscious bias, the fact that they just weren't looking at everybody, guess what happened? Their female leadership metrics went up. Their team members of color metrics went up. It was just amazing.
The revenue went up.
Revenue, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, that Boston Consulting Group said 19% increase in revenue if you hire and retain diverse talent.
That's right. That's right. It's because I have a certain view, but guess what? Like for us, we serve a massive population of team members and residents. And so we want to serve those residents. And I don't know who they all are. But when we have a team that comes from so many different backgrounds, guess what now we do? As an organization, now we do, and we can serve their needs. And it's really amazing.
Yeah, I love that. So, Peter, we've been talking about some really incredible things. You've been able to share a lot of incredible insights into how you've built cultures and your position. I want to talk about now the tough moments. Talk to me about some of these tough moments where the chief people officer, where it's tough in terms of these decisions or building a culture or a leader not being open and receptive to what you're trying to implement.
So a couple things. Number one, this is one of the reasons why I love connecting with athletes and why it's been great to get to know you guys. For the last 10 years, I've known Rod Smith really well. It's because athletes, I think, unlike most people, experience real and authentic loss and failure and defeat. That's daily. Right? And it's right in front of their face. You can't fight it. It's in chapter 2 of your, I think, book on dropping the pass at Michigan State.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
My daughter's boyfriend, Zay, came over to my house last night. Yeah, I gave him your book for an assignment he had.
I appreciate it.
He's 2 chapters in, class is ending. He's like, I didn't want to stop.
I love it.
But
Thank
Ryan,
you.
I've heard you talk about this too, but you guys understand defeat. The problem is in the workplace, a lot of times, everybody tries to gloss it over. Everybody tries to say it's not that big a deal. Let's hide it. Let's keep it out of the forefront. And I think that's the wrong path. So this is my book, which be coming out next year, called The Ugly Advantage, is based on this, the beauty and the power of your brokenness. And so you shouldn't actually run from it. You should run to it. And when you do that, things look different. And I'll give you an example. One of the things as the leader of HR that you have to do, and I've had to do multiple times over my career, is businesses go through hard times, economies go through hard times, and you have to let people go. A lot of times that includes letting really good people go. And it's a hard thing to do. Now, a lot of people will run from that. That's why you saw the Zoom CEO laying off 800 people on a Zoom call. Now, I know they're Zoom, but that's bad form right there.
Yeah. That's not good at all. Not
It's
good at all.
efficient.
It is.
It's efficient.
But then those people, think about those. Are those people ever going to want to come back? or boomerang back. And there's a lot of good people in there. So I have been known everywhere I've been as the guy who a lot of times will have those really hard conversations, because I talk about right out of the gate that this sucks. You don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. It's ugly. I hate this. And we talk about why, it happened, that it's imperfect, and what we can do. And one of the things I've always committed to is to try and help those people find other jobs. And recently that happened, and I ended up putting one of the people I had to let go in front of like 5 different companies. And some of these jobs were like better than the one they had. And so I think you have to really understand that defeat is not a horrible thing. Like pain, and those are great moments to learn. Your drop at Michigan State could have been a ceiling of how your head worked in one negative way, but instead it became this really positive thing that propelled you to even bigger things. So I really think that the one thing that companies have to do is get really comfortable with the uncomfortable. You got to start looking at where are we failing? What's the floor for us? What are the things we're doing wrong? The things that are uncomfortable, those conversations that we don't want to have, let's have those. We're, launching performance management right now, and the hardest thing is leaders like, oh man, I need to have a tough conversation. I don't want to. I'm like, this is a beautiful moment, right? Because that person doesn't want to fail. Right? So why are you letting them wallow in that? Instead, step in that meeting and say, I know you. You're better than this. Is something going on? How can I help you? That's a great conversation.
Love the change in perspective. I just love that viewpoint. It sounds, you're building like a locker room over there, which is like, do I want to go work at Cardinal Group? No, I'm just kidding. Mine's the best. I love my job. But, right, do you have any questions right now?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about, as the chief people officer, having those uncomfortable conversations in those uncomfortable spaces. How do you, as someone who's religious, how do you maybe illustrate for people how, as someone who's religious, who's also in charge of diversity, equity, inclusion, how do you interact with people who are different than you, or see the world different than you, or experience the world different than you? Because I believe a lot of people just think we can't even, there's nowhere space for us to go. Teach us that space, that wherever you're coming from and whatever you believe, you can be functional and inclusive of other people.
Man, to me, it's one of, I think, the secret ingredients that we've really employed. And when I went to Cardinal, I met with my HR team, and I said, let's come up with a phrase that kind of encompasses what we want to be the driving force behind how we operate. And we talked about a lot of things, and they're very corporate-y. And finally, someone in the room says, how about we give a damn about people? And I was like, I love that. I love that. Let's just do that, okay? I give a damn about people. And I think about it, growing up when I was, in Mexico City and we were building an orphanage. Did I care, the beliefs of any of those kids? No. I just loved that we had some water and they were thirsty. That when I was, in inner city Miami with the group and we were building a home for this family, did I care what they thought about the world or what political party they were? No. I just cared that they needed housing and we were able to build a house. And so when I do deal with a lot, I deal with the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
Like, think about COVID. I had every conversation with every person, okay, about why what I said was, our policy on masks was amazing or awful. We had every conversation, but the problem most people have is not having the conversation. I remember a great conversation with a team member. They were a community manager, and they were they had some health issues. They didn't want to wear a mask, and we'd put out this mask mandate, and she was very upset. And we ended up talking for like an hour. And, I think the simple fact that the chief people officer took time to talk to her was number one, and listen to her. And we didn't change each other's views necessarily, but we agreed that we cared about the other person. And so we came with some concessions and some different things that we could do. And it was about the conversation. I always, one of the chapter 6 in my book is talking about the power of real conversations. Most conversations are very superficial and fake. Real conversations are painful. And I say this a lot of times with team members. I say, when we're done with this, you might not be happy and I probably won't be happy. But I said, if we come at this with we're teammates, we're on the same team, we have the same goal and objective, and we care about each other, then it's okay. And so, I think it has to start there. It's this universal truth that a leader of me told long ago. He said, it's impossible to hate the person you're sitting across the table from. It's easy to hate from a distance, right? But sit down, have a conversation, and that changes.
It's just, it's refreshing to hear things like this because this is what's built into sports naturally.
Yeah.
So transitioning out of the NFL and out of sports last year and going in and working with different leaders at different organizations and now being a part of a big one, this is something that's not necessarily built in. It's not a bad thing, but sports builds it in to where Ryan can yell at me and tell me I need to be better and play better, but I don't take it personal. It's not, I don't feel attacked. It's like, no, it's my teammate and like we're trying to win a championship. I just think that's so refreshing, and Peter, just want to shout you out and just acknowledge you for that because that is a hard thing. And some of these organizations, I even think about my dad working at Ford Motor Company, and all they were able to achieve, but they don't have those types of conversations. But it's kind of just black and white there, which is not a bad thing. Well, it is a bad thing. It is.
It leaves money on the table.
It does.
It does, but they're such a huge organization, and you won't necessarily notice it because the revenues and the profits are insane. But I just love the fact that you're doing. I do want to touch on the book. Yes. Can you give us the book title and then what inspired you to write the book? Because sitting next to two authors.
That's right. So it's called The Ugly Advantage, partially because my upbringing was very ugly, but it was beautiful. And it's really, I want to take that word back from being something awful. And it started with, I've always loved Japanese culture, and there was this concept that I had seen called wabi-sabi. And it was this 14th century tea master, and if you know the tea ceremonies then, they were perfect and pristine. Everything was in its place. And he just felt like it was devoid of life. And one day he commissioned somebody to make him some new cups, but he said, I want to see your fingers in the mold. I want to see discoloration and not perfect shapes. And they came with these wabi-sabi cups, and everybody talked about those cups. And they said things like, it's unique, it's different, what's its story? They asked these interesting questions, and he went down this path, which eventually led to this concept called kintsugi. And kintsugi was where they would take broken pottery, and instead of trying to fix it to look perfect like it was, they would use gold molding clay, which would accentuate the cracks. And so the theory of kintsugi was that you're not perfect in spite of your imperfection. You're actually perfect because of your imperfection. That's where your story is. That's what makes you unique. That's what makes you different. What makes you stand out. And so it's this idea that I wanted to take from, how's this kid who came from nothing and didn't even know what was possible. And the culmination of the story, it's one of my favorite stories. I was applying for a job at LexisNexis, huge company. I was at their corporate office in Manhattan. Second time I'd been to Manhattan ever in my life. I would have been 32 at the time. Their office was at 101 Park Avenue. I didn't know Park Avenue was real. I thought it was a Monopoly game. I didn't know it was a real place.
It still isn't once you go to Park Avenue.
Right.
You're like, hey, this is a different place. Yeah.
And I'm at this beautiful old building, waiting in the lobby, and I look around the room. There's 3 other guys that I know are applying for the same job. And their hair is perfect. I got no hair for those who can't see. They're tall. They're wearing groomed clothes. They got monogrammed shirts. And I'm sitting there and I look down at my shoes. Their shoes are shiny. I look down at mine and there is a dog hair on it and some scratches. Love my dogs. And I looked down at it and was like, let's go through the motions, but this isn't going to happen. I sat down at this massive long table, and the CEO's sitting there, Mike, and he asked me a question. He said, this role is to build enterprise change for a global change project we're doing. He said, tell me about your view on change. And I started to give the perfect and pristine answer. And it looked like every other tea ceremony. It looked like everyone else's answer. And in my head, I kept hearing, wabi-sabi, get ugly. And I said, well, Mike, I said, I grew up in a single-wide mobile home. I said, we ate a lot of government cheese growing up. I said, I had to find a way to pay for college. I said, my life has been about managing through change. I said, and not just managing through change, but being successful in the hardest change. I said, and that's why, I told this story. And I said, at the end, I said, this is why I'm the guy for this job. And I left and I knew it was mine. I knew the job was mine. And I thought more people need to hear about this because we live in a society where everything is polished and filtered and perfect, and none of us are polished and perfect and filtered. So it was this idea that let's untap the power of a company and its culture and the individual through their uniqueness, their gutsiness, their likability, and being yoked. And that's the ugly. So that's the 4 components that create ugly.
You sound like a GM in the NFL. Come on, build the team. But before we leave, tell us about your speaking as well. You're a TEDx speaker.
Yeah.
What did you talk about?
So my TEDx was the cul-de-sac startup. It was lessons I learned from my kids that helped me build a couple startups. Watching them play baseball. I remember one of the stories was I saw them and I wanted to be a part of it. And so I went out into cul-de-sac and I said, hey, can I go buy you guys bases? And they're like, no, Dad, we got sticks. And so it was this idea of sticks over bases. Don't wait for perfection. Make something, create something, and make it happen. So it was all those ideas. And I have always loved speaking and telling stories. And it really came down to the fact that I was not a really good learner in school. I had bad grades generally. I had a hard time concentrating and getting hard concepts. So I would have to frame them in stories in my head so I could remember them. Wow. And so through that process, I felt like I became a really good storyteller. And I felt like I have a message that people need to hear and want to hear. And I can apply it in a way that they remember. My mentor, Mark Sanborn, he has a great quote. He said, stories are the coat racks that you hang ideas on. And so I love telling stories and getting team members inspired to do something different through the power of a speech. And I'll share one really quick story. So I was doing the national sales meeting for a U.S. bank company at the Venetian in Vegas.
Nice.
Yes. Yeah. Have you seen the Sphere there, by the way? Man, that new concert. Anyway, yeah. So 2,000 salespeople. I'm delivering, and they're all, in the perfect blue suits there. And I'm giving this speech on ugly. And at the end, there was this, standing ovation. You could tell it really hit people. And the president of one of the divisions, about a week later, he sent me a note on LinkedIn. And it was a picture he had on his desk. And it was a little boy on a couch. And he said, this picture is me growing up. He said, my mom and I grew up homeless. And he said, I never told anyone. He said, nobody had a clue. He said, I heard your speech. I put this on my desk. He said, in the last week, I've had the best conversations with my team I've ever had. So why do I speak? I don't speak to be heard. I speak to change. And I always say, this is the definition of unique to me. So in Webster's dictionary, unique is how you make others see you. My definition of unique as a speaker is how I make others see themselves. So my goal as a speaker is not to make them see me, is to make them see themselves, and in a way that they go, man, why haven't I tapped into that? Why haven't I doubled down on that? That's why I speak.
Yeah, This is incredible, and Peter's an incredible speaker. So, Peter, where can people find you, man? Thank you for coming on the Gridiron Growth Podcast, but where can people find you?
They can find me at peteralynch.com. That's my speaking website. And then cardinalgroup.com is our company. We're doing some amazing things. Any amazing people want to look for a job, come to cardinalgroup.com. We got lots of awesome jobs.
Go to Cardinal Group. I know Peter really well, and the CEO, Alex, a great organization and company that I've been able to speak to because of Peter. So appreciate you coming on the Gridiron and Growth Podcast, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.